The war had already been decided when the first American soldier stepped onto the beach, but he didn't know that. The ocean was still dark, the horizon barely visible, when the ramp of the landing craft slammed down and men ran forward into gunfire that sounded like tearing metal. Some would not make it past the waterline. Others would live long enough to remember the smell of cordite and salt for the rest of their lives. At that moment, none of them were thinking about power, strategy, or history. They were thinking about survival. Decades later, this moment would be remembered as proof of American military might. But the truth was more complicated. The United States did not begin as a military power. It became one slowly, reluctantly, and often by accident. What the world would later call the most powerful fighting force in history was born from fear. Fear of standing armies, fear of tyranny, fear of becoming what the young republic had rebelled against. In the earliest days of America, soldiers were not heroes, they were necessary evils. The revolution had been won with militias and desperation, not with polished uniforms or permanent institutions. When independence came, the army was deliberately weakened. Leaders believed oceans would protect them. They believed ideals would be enough. Reality disagreed. As the nation expanded westward, force followed. Forts appeared on the frontier. Skirmishes became campaigns. Campaigns became wars. The military learned through violence how to move, supply, and dominate space. It learned how to adapt to terrain, how to fight enemies who did not wear uniforms, how to impose order where law had not yet arrived. Then America turned its weapons on itself. The Civil War shattered every assumption the country had about conflict. It was no longer a matter of bravery or honor. It was industry against industry, manpower against manpower. Railroads carried troops faster than ever before. Factories poured out rifles, cannons, ammunition. The battlefield became a machine that consumed human beings at a rate no one had imagined possible. When the war ended, the United States possessed something new, experience in total war. The military shrank again, but the knowledge remained. Officers studied maps differently now. Logistics mattered more than courage. Coordination mattered more than tradition. At the turn of the 20th century, America tested itself beyond its borders. When its navy destroyed a European fleet in hours, the world noticed. When American troops occupied distant territories, the country began to see itself differently, not as a defender of its shores, but as a force that could reach across oceans. Still, hesitation lingered. World War I dragged the United States into global conflict. The Army expanded overnight. Millions were trained, armed, and shipped overseas. The war ended before America fully unleashed its strength, but the lesson was written clearly. When mobilized, the United States could produce and deploy power at a scale few nations could match. After the war, the country stepped back again. Budgets were cut. Ships were mothballed. The belief returned that war was an exception, not a condition. Then the sky over Pearl Harbor filled with aircraft. What followed was not just a military response, it was a transformation. The American economy became a weapon. Factories that once made cars produced tanks. Assembly lines produced bombers. Scientists worked under military contracts, racing against enemies in time. The armed forces became global, coordinated, relentless. By the end of World War II, the United States was no longer merely victorious, it was dominant. The war should have ended the story. Instead, it rewrote it. Rather than disbanding, the American military became permanent. New doctrines were written. New institutions were built. Intelligence and military power merged. The Cold War turned preparation into a way of life. Bases spread across continents. Soldiers trained not for wars that were happening, but for wars that might happen tomorrow. conflicts erupted anyway. Korea burned without resolution, Vietnam bled without victory. Each war exposed the limits of raw power and forced adaptation. Technology advanced, tactics evolved. The military learned painful lessons about politics, culture, and the cost of underestimating resistance. When the Cold War ended, America stood alone at the top, unchallenged. That position was more dangerous than any enemy. Confidence hardened into doctrine. Precision weapons promised clean wars. Satellites watched every corner of the planet. The American military could strike anywhere, anytime. The question was no longer whether it could win battles, but whether it could shape outcomes. The 21st century answered brutally. The attacks came without uniforms, without battle lines. The response was overwhelming force applied against invisible networks. Wars stretched into decades. Soldiers rotated through deserts and mountains, fighting enemies who dissolved into populations and returned stronger each time. Behind the scenes, the military became more advanced than ever. Drones replaced pilots, algorithms assisted commanders, cyber units fought wars no one could see. Power shifted from sheer numbers to information dominance. And yet, the human cost never disappeared. Young men and women carried the weight of decisions made far above them. They fought for ideas, for orders, for each other. The American military remained unmatched, but not unchanged. Because force shapes the nation that wields it. And as the United States moves deeper into an era of technology-driven warfare, one truth remains unresolved: whether the greatest military power in history can exist without eventually redefining the very country it was built to protect.